but I think there are lots of trails that you can pursue and not see so many folks out there. So good point, Dave. And Dave, another Dave, where did you start your hike at Lucian Morin?
Oh, right there by McGregor's.
Okay.
And we went in on up on the high part, right along the property line, and then came back along the water.
Oh, nice. I haven't really ever hiked Lucian Morin. I need to get there. I would like to know that part.
It's quite hilly. You'd never know that from the road, but there's a lot up and down in there.
Yeah.
There are probably 15 cars parked there, but we hardly saw any people on the trails.
So
I think they're spread out.
Is that the one with the old rifle range?
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's right.
Is this where you're starting it? Is it down on the bay area?
Yes,
Like,
it's right past Bay Creek.
okay, that's what
Yeah,
I
right
thought.
after, if you come from the city, right after you cross over the
Right.
creek.
Does it
Parking
start
lot.
on the north side or on the
So on the
The
south
south.
side of Empire,
south side?
Right next to McGregor's.
Okay,
Yeah.
I know where
almost
McGregor.
shares a parking lot.
Yeah, you can't miss it.
Yeah.
Hey,
really.
Reinhard, how you doing over there?
Hey, pretty good, Dave. Pretty good. It's kind of mellow tonight.
Okay.
Dave, when you hiked that rifle range trail, how far did you go?
Well, not too far. I had my grandkids with me and the
Okay.
dog, and we just wanted to get out. We probably walked for a good hour,
Okay.
but I think you can walk all the way up until you get to Browncroft Boulevard
Yes.
if you take
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
proper trails.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
I have to search for a map on that.
Yeah, I think they have a listing on the Monroe County website. You can just see all the different trails
Okay.
and all of that. Or use the All Trails app and that'll have it all listed as well.
Yeah, and any Jill, any Monroe County Park that has trails, they'll have a map right on the Monroe County Park website.
Oh, I've been
They
getting.
do a very good job of that. And you can
Yeah.
actually, you can hike from Lucian Morin to Powder Mill and Tryon. I did that as a 3-park hike this summer. You can actually connect all 3.
Really? Wow.
Powder Mill, really?
Yep.
Let's see. Okay.
Where do you cross the creek if you're going over to Tryon?
I don't know if I can describe to exactly where we crossed it, but
Could you
I
been
remember going on a
Browncroft?
road there. I'll try to pull up my all trails from it.
There was a proposal many years ago to build a bridge to connect the 2 parks near where the dam used to be,
Mm-hmm.
but ADK was opposed to it because it was felt that it would encourage bicyclers in the rifle range trail, and the proposal never went anywhere.
Okay, I'm sorry. It was Ellison Park, not Powder Mill.
It makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah,
That was a long
that
way
makes
away.
sense.
You just have to walk on the roads to get to Powder Mill Park.
Well, I biked yesterday to Pulteneyville.
Yeah.
So beautiful, yeah.
Nice.
We took the back roads instead of Lake Road. So still a fair amount of golden color in the apple orchards and some of the trees. But boy, when you got next to the lake, 10 degrees colder. I think so. It was a beautiful day for biking as well.
Good. That sounds great.
Mhm.
Did you
And I
pick some
had my
apple?
grandkids today at cemetery at Whitehaven. So we visited our ancestors and took a nice walk there as well.
Nice.
I recently took a walk in the Pittsburgh Cemetery, which is really a lovely little cemetery. It was really beautiful when the trees were at peak, and it was a really nice place to walk around, and I had never been there before.
Where is the Pittsford Cemetery?
It is off of 96. Well, it's off of 152, 153.
153.
153. Right, it's near Nazareth, and I'm having a hard time
Pardon?
describing it.
It kind of runs between like East Rochester and Fairport.
Uh-huh. The old
Okay.
section is the prettier section, but we did walk the new section too. So you can include with that a stop to Pittsford Dairy, so that's always a plus.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
Looking for those treats. What can I say? So what else have people been doing outside?
Raking.
Well, Letchworth Park was beautiful yesterday. It's lost most of its leaves,
Uh-huh.
but it was just a golden day and some fabulous views, of course. I mean, with so many of the leaves off, now you can really get perspectives you can't quite get at other times of the year.
Is it
So
very
there's-
crowded there? When
Well,
when you went?
the leaf peepers were gone, okay? Mostly because the leaves were gone. And so without them around, a couple of motorcycles rumbled by and, people out and about, but not at all crowded. No, it was great. We were on the really heavily populated west side there by the Three Falls, and not very many folks at all. But just a gorgeous day to get out there.
I've been
Mhm.
planning to go down there and hike that section of the FLT that runs on the other side of the gorge.
Yes.
Does anyone know if there's hunting going on there this time of year?
There is hunting allowed in the park. Whether there's hunting going on there, I can't attest to that. But
I
I
don't
was
think-
trying,
allowed.
I'm
I
sorry,
was looking
somebody.
at some maps on the Finger Lake Trails maps
Uh-huh.
on the internet. And they mark, they have these updates that will mark where their hunting is allowed.
Okay,
I
I'll-
noticed that. I was trying to
I'll check
figure
that.
out like what maps I might like. It was a little hard for me to figure out, but then, I was just reading some things on the website and it said, for the latest, hunting updates, click here and
mhm.
The way
I'll
they
check
do
that
the
out.
FLT, Dave, the way they do the FLT integrated map, if you go online, it's really a wonderful map.
Yeah,
And if you-
I've done that.
So if you blow up the area you're thinking about, the trail you're talking about is called the Letchworth Trail.
Mhm.
And if you blow up to that, one of the indicators they give is if there's a hunting closure, there's like a red flag. And
Oh, yeah,
you will see that. And then you click on that, and it'll tell you exactly what dates
Yeah.
that particular area is closed. I
wasn't
don't believe, and I
concerned
can look up, I don't believe they close any part of that trail
No.
for hunting closures though.
I wasn't concerned so much about a closure on that section as I was whether people are running around with
guns.
shotguns or
Yeah.
bows and arrows, and I kind of doubt it. I don't think it's good.
Most of the
Yeah.
hunting, I've done a lot of hiking on that side. Most of the indications I've seen for hunting down there are down closer to the gorges in the water. I've seen a lot of tree stands down there. I haven't seen a
Yeah.
lot right on the FLT portion right there because it's back
Uh-huh.
off the river quite a ways.
Yeah,
Right,
Where
is that-
Hive is.
What?
Is that the section you hiked recently?
Where
Pardon?
orange?
Is that the section that you hiked, Reinhard, recently?
Yes,
Letchworth?
yeah, I actually hiked from the dam down to Portageville. And but that was a few weeks back, but as I think Luke is correct, I don't believe any of that of the Letchworth branch at FLT. I don't believe any of it is closed because of hunting season, unlike the Bristol Hills branch.
Yeah.
right.
where I do believe, they do close for certain periods,
Correct.
the trail, they just don't want you on it.
So again, I see lots of people have their mute on, which you're welcome to have, but you don't have to mute until 7:30 when we start the meeting. And we'd love for anybody to share now during this time and tell us where you've been hiking, or if you're camping, or what outdoor pursuits you are finding in this great weather and during this time. So feel free.
You know, 2 days ago, we went with some friends paddling on Black Creek, starting in Churchville and going
Nice.
upstream there. That's another really lovely area.
Uh-huh.
Really calm water, beautiful reflections off there on the lake. But I tell you, we got a few miles upstream of the lake, and somebody was blasting away with a gun. I mean, like, this person was not hunting. This was, like semi-automatic
Oh my gosh.
gunfire. Yep, it was, and we couldn't see anybody. We could just hear it very distinct. Clearly, this person was not far off, and it did make me wonder whether or not we would paddle all the way to Idaho or something. I mean, it was surprising how much gunfire there was there. So we didn't go that much further,
I was thinking maybe there's a rifle range over there.
Could be just a private landowner, doing target practice on his property and the like. But, when you're used to going to a place where it's quiet, especially if you're going off into the wilderness or something like that, boy, when somebody starts shooting a gun like that, especially when it's really quiet and it really carries, it really startles you.
Yeah.
That section, that paddle from Churchville during the earlier, like during the summer, I've never seen as much wildlife on a paddle as I did on that section. I think at one point I saw something like 4 or 5 herons, egrets rather, perched on trees, all at one view,
Nice.
just incredible, Beautiful section, creek.
Hey, just as an FYI, there is a rifle range. It's on the creek, just on the other side of what I think is Route 19. So if you had paddled near Route 19, you're pretty close to a rifle range.
Okay, good to know. All right.
Yeah, so
Anybody else?
so this isn't current. About a month ago, my wife and I finally finished the fire tower challenge. So
good.
that was exciting.
Good. Yeah.
So we finished off in the Catskills, which was a whole different set of terrain, but it was a lot of fun. It was definitely worth it. We were graced with good weather. Most of it. There's only 3 that we couldn't really see anything from. They were just short hills, but I don't know. I think my favorite was Snowy or Poco Moonshine, and it was just a great experience. So that was all. And then, we had some family issues going on over here, so that kind of put a damper on doing anything exciting, but that's a different discussion for another time. But it was fun. It was a lot of fun.
We've been doing, Dave and I have been doing the fire towers. We do them mostly when we go up to the board of directors meetings up in the Adirondacks. That gives us an excuse to get outside when we go for this indoor meeting. But when you go to the Catskills, do you stay in that area? Because we're less familiar with that, and it's hard to know where to stay.
My wife has been for those who don't know my wife, Angelica, the very petite, lovely German woman. She's not a camper at all, but she's willing to go out on these hikes with her husband, which I really appreciate. So the sacrifice, the agreement that I make is, sure, we'll stay wherever you want to stay. So when we went down to the Catskills, we stayed at I don't know, not a Motel 6, like a Holiday Inn or something, over in Socrates. And the plan was to hike. There was 4 that you can hike. We were going to stay in Socrates and then shift over to Liberty for the other 2, and then head back up to Rochester. And what we ended up doing was, we spent a week down there. We did 4 from Socrates, which is 20 minutes north of Kingston, and then on the way home, we did what was the short one there? Red Hill, I think it is. And so we just, when we drove home, we just stopped there and then hiked that and then came back.
Nice.
But,
Well,
it was it's a little logistical planning. The terrain is different, and what I was surprised, the Adirondacks, you're walking across slabs of granite or a forest floor, right? Whatever. Here, or at least down there, you're walking across crushed shale, right? So it was actually, there was actually harder on the feet, right? Because the pointed rocks and all of that. But I mean, it was fine. And then Hunter is the big challenge one. That one you got to be prepared for. And on more than one occasion, you'd see people get partially up and they're like, nope, apparently my flip-flops aren't going to work. And then they wisely would go back. Right? And but I mean, that people would tend to underestimate the difficulty of that. And there's 2 paths. There's like a 10-mile path that's kind of less steep, and then there's the steep path, which is what we did. And there were some people that wisely chose to turn back. But I mean, we found it okay. It's like all things, we're not marathoners, so we're not going to run up the hill. And you take your time, you get up to the top, and the views were spectacular. I mean, truly, truly spectacular. And we had gotten down there just before the leaves started to change. So like the first place we went to on Monday, it was like, mostly red or mostly green, but you can see they started to change. But by the end of the week, when we got up to Hunter, it was, you could really see the leaves changing. So I think that would have been really a peak like a week later, but that was just how it worked out for us. So it was a lot of fun. There's a couple more in the Adirondacks we still want to go get to, and we will, but the challenge itself is completed. So we're building our next list, I should say.
well done.
Congrats.
Yeah.
Thank
Bill, when is the next board meeting? Do you know?
Well, it should be the first weekend in December. I mean, that's when it was originally scheduled
Right.
for. And they have changed a few of them, but I think that's probably when it is. They've been doing all of them virtually, so I suspect that we're not getting too many fire towers in right now because we need to be in our living room to do the board meeting. So. Anybody else been out on adventures?
Can you hear me, Jill?
Yes.
We can.
I just thought I'd comment on a paddle I did on last Monday,
Okay.
which, was one of the gorgeous days. But I went out of the bay and thought I'd poke my nose out into the lake and into Lake Ontario. And I did. I've never seen Lake Ontario that calm. And so
Really?
was actually able to, I paddled down to the west end of Duran Beach from the outlet of the bay, and then back and another mile east, and then back into the bay. And the fun part was, as I told Betty, the waves crashing against my boat appeared to be at least 1 inch to 1.5 inches high.
That big, huh?
Yeah, and there really was very little wind. I hadn't been out on the lake in a long time, but it was absolutely marvelous. And the one thing that was wonderful, when you got back in the bay, you ran into a bunch of paddleboarders and kayakers and canoeists, and it was like the big boats can't get under the bridge, so we've taken over the bay.
Uh-huh. Very
Yeah.
cool. That's great.
Did you go with other ADK people? Because friends of mine that live on the bay asked me if my Monday group was out there, and of course we weren't. But so I just wondered.
No, I just
They-
kind of did it on my own. It was kind of a unplanned thing. Actually, I hadn't planned to go out on the lake, but I ran into some people when I was coming out into the bay, and they said, "Oh, have you checked out the lake?" And I said, "No." "Oh, go check it out." So I did.
Mhm.
It must have been the ideal time to do the lake.
Yeah, almost no wind, and and
waters.
nice and sunny. It was wonderful.
Plenty
Well,
of waves.
I tried to meet Barb Brenner at not Hemlock, Canadice, 3 to 4 weeks ago, and we got down there and there were what are they called? Waves with white
Whitecaps?
whitecaps. I could, yeah, whitecaps. And it was not very inviting. So I'm glad you found a smooth Lake Ontario.
Yeah, I hear the water's way down in both Hemlock and Canadice. Did you run into that?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
We hiked, actually I hiked this week down to Hemlock doing Rob's Trail, and the water area is so low that you can walk in the waterbed along Hemlock Lake.
Wow.
So it's interesting.
Jill, was Rob's Trail pretty muddy? Did you hike the section from the road down to Canadice, or did you go the other way?
We started at the top of Hemlock on 15A and just went down to the lake and then back up. And
To Hemlock Lake.
yes, and it was not very wet.
Okay.
There was one muddy patch that
Yeah,
It was
very
little-
minor, I felt like.
I know that section going the other way down to Canadice can get pretty muddy.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
I look forward to doing that. That was my first time on Rob's Trail. I was glad to finally get there.
Guys, I'll be right back. I'm in the middle of baking some stuff, but I'll be back for the other thing. I'll be
Okay,
right back, all right?
I'll look for you.
All right, no worries.
Okay, hi, Jerry Fletcher here. If we're taking rounds on stuff, I don't have a camera and I'm using the phone for voice here. I had an adventure I could talk for about an hour on, but I'll keep it pretty short. I did an adventure in a more horizontal fashion, partly than the typical sort of elevation gain, which is generally my heart's delight. I took a 2-week transcontinental Amtrak train trip at the end of August and beginning of September, and I widely encourage such an adventure for everyone. It's a safe form of travel at this point because Amtrak is being pretty vigorous about the masking requirement, which is one of the reasons I looked into it. And I took 4 days in Denver, which I took the opportunity to hike up James Peak to over 13,000 feet after acclimating slightly the day before, driving up to Berthoud Pass at 11:03. And we just had a perfect day to go up James Peak. It's not a 14er, but the 360 views are amazing. You pass over a glacier of about a half mile long and 100 yards or so wide. It's the finger of a remnant glacier there. It's on the Continental Divide. It was recommended to me by a friend out in the Denver area, and yeah, we couldn't have had a better day for it. There were a number of strange experiences with all of that, and then I continued on through the Rockies entirely by train to Sacramento, switched trains up to Portland, when I booked the hotel, I asked them for a room that overlooked the riots, but yeah, there wasn't anything going on. It was too boring there. I did run into an Albany expat, which was kind of fun to have a little conversation with him, but the timing couldn't have been better. I missed the fires on the West Coast. The fires in Colorado had just passed by about 24 hours. So as we traveled through some of the gorges and canyons, there was a lot of soot that burned things, but there were no active fires. The fires in Oregon and maybe California were still a week or two away. And then, so I went up to Portland, and that was a laundry. Denver was a tourist and a laundry stop. Portland was a laundry stop. And from Portland, I went over to Glacier National Park. And since the buses and shuttles were not running, were not operating, as they go out basically of the east side of the park, which I had never heard anybody mention before, but the east side of Glacier Park is actually on Blackfoot Indian Reservation, and almost all the Indian reservations out west are closed to the public because of the pandemic to protect their vulnerable populations. So being there and not wanting to miss an opportunity, because Glacier is not the easiest place to get to, I figured there was no car rental. I into the park. So if you can envision a New York thruway toll station with a line of cars and one person with his park pass there, it was a kind of a comical sight as I'm walking into the place where there's a line of cars, and I ended up hiking about 2.5 miles up to the Lake McDonald there, and the little tourist village that's on the south end of the lake. And yes, there are bears around and such. Even the garbage cans, the trash cans at the train station are bear proofed. And then the next morning, bright and early, I got the train again. The next day, across the Continental Divide in Montana, and spent the entire next day crossing the state of Montana. It's a little bigger than Rhode Island. And eventually made my way back through a sunny day in Chicago, as all train traffic does stop in Chicago, and finally back to the Louise Slaughter Station here in Rochester. And it could not have worked out better in the planning, and the weather, and the sights there. I highly recommend such a trip to everyone, and take some stops along the way.
Wow, that's quite an adventure, Jerry. Getting close to meeting time. Does anybody else have any adventures they want to share about? Any way that you've enjoyed this weather locally? Or in New York State?
Just putting all my plants away for the winter.
Yeah.
Cleaning out the gardens and the hike that you did. So nothing out of the real ordinary.
Yeah, they're bonus days to get that yard work done. Beautiful days. So looks like we have a good crew today. I mean, what, Dave, do you have a number?
We have 46 at this point.
Great.
And I think
That's
this is probably a good time to break it off and ask everybody but our speakers to mute themselves. And what I'd like to do is ask Luke to give any announcements, business updates, that sort of thing. And then after Luke Nelson talks, then we'll get on with the program. So Luke, are you there and ready?
Sure, Dave, thanks. First announcement, since I saw Bill just posted something, I thought I'd remind people, if they didn't see what he just added to the group, that there's only 5 openings left for the lodge trip next February, the 18th to 21st. The lodge will be at 65% capacity. So there, you can go on to the website. He has the link in the chat of our meeting right now. You can go on to the website if you want to register for that, or shoot Bill an email and let him know if you're interested. A couple other things. In the December meeting, we'll be doing the annual for our Articles of Association, voting in the officers for the chapter. Currently, the officers are myself as chair, Bill Catalano as vice chair, Mary Ruth Merkel as treasurer, Reinhardt is the secretary. If you or anyone is interested in running for any of those positions, please contact Bill Lindenfelter. We are still looking for a couple open positions. If you're interested in any of these, please contact me. We're looking for a programs chair, a trails chair, and a young members chair. And we also wanted to let people know that we are starting to do some weekday hikes. The women's group has done weekday hikes for quite a while, but we're starting out also do some general weekday hikes. So keep an eye on the calendar on the website if you're interested in those. And we're also really looking for hike leaders. And if any of you are interested in being a hike leader, we'll absolutely provide you support if you want to do it, but it's your first time, we will provide you with someone else to help you with that. So if you're interested in becoming a hike leader or leading hikes, please contact Reinhardt or contact Jill. Okay, that's about it, Dave.
Thanks, Luke. Appreciate the update. Before I go to my lovely wife, Jill, to introduce our speaker tonight, I want to remind everybody to please mute yourself. You can do that by going to the lower left corner of the Zoom meeting window and clicking on mute. And the other thing that you'll do is we'll have slides being viewed by our speaker. And while that's happening, you can view just a couple of faces and the full slides on your computer by going all the way to the opposite corner once the slides are up and clicking on the upper right corner to show just one or two faces plus the full slides, or just the full slides alone. That's it for my announcements. If there's a problem that I need to know about, you can contact me through the chat, or you can also send me a text. My phone is 585-478-5514. That's 585-478-5514. So now I'll turn it over to Jill.
Okay, well, I'm going to introduce our speaker tonight. Gary Diana is going to present his story on summoning Aconcagua. I think he's the one who needs to tell the name of that, but Gary's been in the Rochester area for 35 years. He's been married for 40 years. He has 2 adult kids. Currently, he's a software engineer at Paychex, and he's a runner, he's a hunter, and he's a hiker. And he's going to tell us about his hiking adventures. So please welcome Gary Diana. Gary?
Yep, I'm going to share my screen here, Jill, if I can.
Okay, sounds good.
And I think it's this one. Let's see. Whoops. Oh, sure.
It looks like you've done it, Gary.
Is it showing up, Jill?
Yes, it is.
Okay, cool. Let me just get the other thing, the other screen ready on my, oh, okay. All right. All right. Well, welcome everybody. Thanks. I'm glad you're here to hear my recent trip of to Argentina. I found this quote just recently by a pretty famous mountaineer. And what I like about it is he talks about being just an ordinary chap. And that's where I think I fall. I can really identify with that. I like climbing mountains. I'm not a high school or a college star athlete. Played a little bit of lacrosse in high school, but that was it. Up until the mountains, I liked running. And I found out early on that I couldn't run fast because I'm big. I'm over 6 feet tall and over 200 pounds. But I like to run long. And so I started running, 10Ks and then 15Ks. And I finally challenged myself with some half marathons. And then I started thinking about, well, a half marathon is, it's only twice the amount of running. So why not try marathons? So I did several of them. And anyway, this talk about mountains. So I didn't just wake up one day and fly to Argentina thinking I would climb Aconcagua. I actually did do that, but there was a series of events that happened prior to that day, almost a decade's worth. And I'd like to take the first few minutes of this talk and just let you know, how did I get to the point where I would even consider climbing this mountain that's almost 23,000 feet tall? So the story sort of starts out, after 23 years of writing software for Eastman Kodak, I was voted off the island. And what that means is I got caught up in a workforce reduction. So back in, I think it was May of 2011, I found myself at home looking for the next job, and I had some paid time off on my hands. And I went on a hike with a friend to the top of Mount Allen. And what was interesting about that was this friend had been bugging me for quite a long time about showing me maps and telling me all these stories about these hikes he was going on in the 46 high peaks. And I didn't really know what he was talking about. But he called me once I had some time off and said, hey, we're going on this hike. You really like the people. You should go with us. So I bought some equipment and met him on a Friday night at his camp in Inlet. Saturday morning, we drove to the trailhead, met up with our other friends, and we started this hike. And it was a pretty long hike. There were a lot of bugs, a lot of spruce trees. Didn't seem to go uphill very much at all. Till finally, after walking about 8 miles, we hit the ascent to the top. And about halfway up, we heard all this noise. This woman and her friends were coming down, older woman, probably as old as I am now. And she was all excited, saying that she was a 46er. She had finished on Mount Allen and she was now a 46er. And she looked at me and she said, oh, what mountain is this for you? And I go, oh, this is number one. And she goes, number one, whose idea was it to bring you out here for this one? And I didn't really get what she was talking about. And we just kind of laughed and we went back up to the top. Not really great views on Allen compared to most high peaks. So we started back down. We didn't get back to our vehicles until 10 or 11 o'clock. And if you've hiked Allen, depending on whether the bridge is there or not, there were no bridges when we were there. We had 2 water crossings. And I got back to my buddy's camp that night. My feet were beat. I had blisters because of the nice new LL Bean boots I had. But a few days later, the wounds healed and I was fine. I really enjoyed the experience. It was very physical, just loved it. So a month later, my buddy calls me up and we do the Santanoni range, Cooch, Santanoni, and Panther. And so all of a sudden now I've got four peaks in my history. A month after that, in August, we stayed at Heart Lake for 3 days. We hiked RPR, Rocky Peak Ridge and Giant, one day. There's a cairn on Rocky Peak Ridge. On day 2, we did Dial and Nippletop, 90 degrees, high humidity and no wind and lots of bugs. And on day 3, we did Street and I. And suddenly I had 10 high peaks. And, the addiction was fully setting in at that point.
Gary, I have a question for you. Were you going to show us a picture, like that Allen picture or anything?
Oh,
Because we're still on the first slide.
oh, sorry. I goofed here.
No, it's all right. I had a feeling you had some pictures for us.
Yeah. All right, let me start out this by saying I'm not a professional public speaker.
And this is a new deal for anybody to be doing these presentations on Zoom. So,
All right, I won't repeat everything I said. I think these, unless it needs that explanation, but okay, Cooch, Rocky Peak Ridge and Giant, Cairns, Dial and Nippletop. Day after that, Street and Nye. And then, that's the other window in my way. Okay, so fast forward 24 months and 34 high peaks later, we set out to finish the 46 high peaks on Whiteface Mountain. We picked Whiteface because we wanted our families to come up, and not everybody in our family likes a strenuous hike, and they knew they could drive up, and many of them had never been to the top of Whiteface. So I thought, if nothing else, it was a good experience for people to have. So we started out at the trailhead, which if you've done Whiteface before, at the atmospheric station, and on the way up to Whiteface, we made a quick diversion and got Esther Mountain and had a nice little celebration up there with our families. Next up, Mount Washington. I was going for the higher peaks in the Northeast, stuff that was easy to get to. So my wife and I drove. We were doing a Northeast vacation. We drove to Mount Washington. I took the Tuckerman Ravine Trail up to the top. My wife took the train. We met up there about noontime in a complete fog of bad weather. But the weather below the summit was very nice. You could see here there was just clouds rolling off the summit into the Tuckerman Ravine. But at the trailhead, it was 70, 75 degrees, really nice. Up on the summit, 40 degrees, 40-mile-an-hour winds, and it was fogged in, and that was mid-August. There's the marker, more Tuckerman Ravine. If you've never taken that trail, it's really beautiful. So we continued our trip. We went to Millinocket, Maine, way up in northern Maine, which is the closest town to Mount Katahdin. Now, Mount Katahdin's a little trickier. You have to have a parking permit in order to go there. So I secured 2 parking permits so I'd have a weather day in case I needed it. We didn't end up needing that, but so my wife dropped me off at the trailhead. I chose the trail that is the last portion of the Appalachian Trail, which was fun because I actually had a group of about 8 really young AT finishers pass me on the summit, and I was moving pretty good, and they were moving way faster. And I guess that's what 2,000 miles of training behind them got them. They were in pretty good shape. There's the summit sign on Mount Katahdin, kind of beat, but it's a pretty brutal environment up there. There's another way to get to the summit of Mount Katahdin, and that's on this ridge called the Knife Edge. And I'd love to climb that someday. It's really narrow. It's extremely, as you can see, an extremely sharp drop off. They recommend you don't do it in high winds or in wet weather. But that looks like a really cool way to get to the summit as well. So I kept doing outside stuff, you know, more mountain. I repeated some mountains. I've hiked with friends, and so we've done high peaks. You know, I've done multiple high peaks with people. I got my wife out and daughter out on some high peaks, my son-in-law. I've been to 2 sessions of winter mountaineering school. This is put on by the ADK. Here's a picture of our instructors at Heart Lake. You recognize the moose head and the fireplace. Really great group of people, learn tons of stuff, just a lot of stuff. Highly recommend it. They're going to do it virtually this year. So it's probably still worth checking out if you're interested. But if you could do it in person, it's great. And I'll show you some of the things we did. So this is Benny's Brook Slide, which actually leads right up to pretty close to the summit of Lower Wolfjaw. So a great place to put on your crampons and get out your ice axe and practice. And that's what we did. We did 1 day trip out of JBL as part of ADK Winter Mountaineering School. Here's another angle to give you an idea of how steep that ice was. Day 2, we did a day trip to Gothics, Armstrong, and Upper Wolf Jaw. Here you can see we're going up the cable side of Gothics. You can see in the foreground there, one of the eyelets sticking up in a little short piece of the cable. Here we've come down from the Gothics, from the summit of Gothics, we're headed up to Armstrong. We just took time to hang our ADK Winter Mountaineering School sign and take a quick picture. So again, I kept hiking. My wife and I, we vacation in Vermont every year. So we did some 4,000 footers in Vermont, and I'd travel over to New Hampshire and do a few more peaks in the presidential range of the White Mountains. Then I ran into a friend who had hiked, just come back from a hike on Mount Rainier. And she was telling me how great it was and how that I'd like it. So I'd heard of Mount Rainier, but it wasn't on my radar at all. And it was way outside the Northeast. I'd have to take a plane and all this. But luckily, I went out to a software conference out in Seattle and got to see Mount Rainier. And that pretty much sold it for me. So I scheduled a trip for June 2017 with Rainier Mountaineering Incorporated. You'll hear their name again. I'll refer to them as RMI. And I was back at training pretty hard because this is a high altitude, 14,000 foot peak, a pretty serious climb. But my left knee had other plans. Here's an endoscopic camera image of my left medial meniscus. I'm not an orthopedist, but this apparently has 2 tears and a fold. So in early June of 2017, I had surgery here in Rochester at the sports medicine clinic. And my doctor told me I'd be good for a trip in September. So I rescheduled my trip for September. Within 10 days, I was training almost back to normal. My recovery has been 100% since. I was really fortunate because if you Google this operation, not everybody has that kind of a result. Another shot of Mount Rainier from the parking lot at Paradise. And here we are, September 2017, 3 months after the surgery, on the Muir snowfield. So you start out the trailheads at Paradise, where the parking lot was there, and you walk about 4 miles and gain about 4,700 feet in altitude to get to Camp Muir. And when you're at Camp Muir, RMI has this hut on the left where the clients stay. And on the right, you see the stone hut where the guides sleep. And then in the middle, one of their outhouses. So what happens is you arrive around mid-afternoon, you get a little time to rest and get your stuff in a bunk. And then dinner's at 6 o'clock. Really, it's just something you mix with hot water, something dehydrated. And the guides came in and gave us the lowdown on how it was going to work on the upper part of the mountain. When we'd wake up sometime between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m. and we'd get started on the summit. The trouble is right around supper time, bad weather came in the form of ice, snow, and 50-mile-an-hour winds.
I thought that was Brad, but it's not.
The gusts shook the hut. So we never got our wake-up call. And about 6 o'clock in the morning, the guides came in and said, we're not doing it. It's too dangerous. The weather's too bad. And we got to get out of here. We got to get down. So we packed our gear up, and by 6:30 or so, we were walking down the mountain in a snowstorm with heavy winds. And as it was, we were all pretty unimpressed with the weather and kind of depressed about the fact that the summit got taken away from us. But what I learned about this trip is that that's just what happens. You know, mountains have their own weather, and it's not uncommon that your summit dream just goes away. So we talked about it. We went back down to RMI headquarters there, had a little meeting and talked about what happened and why and all that stuff. So kind of a dismal trip home, and had some time to think about it. So the 2018 Rainier schedule came out, and I signed up for a trip in July 2018. I was going to go back. I was determined to stand on that summit. And I had to make one promise, and one promise was made to me. And that is, my wife made me promise I wouldn't get hurt on the mountain. And my daughter, who was getting married a month after my trip, promised me that even with a broken leg, I was going to walk her down the aisle. Here we are. So we're on the upper part of the mountain here, the morning of July 5th, 2018, sunrise at about 12,000 feet, feeling the effects of thin air, and just keep breathing one foot in front of the other. Above Camp Muir, we were always on a glacier, and we actually traveled on 3 different glaciers. Here we're on the biggest of the 3, the Emmons Glacier. So we were always wearing crampons. We were always roped together in groups of 3 to 4. And that's in case somebody slips and falls, that we can all go into a self-arrest position and try to stop the fall. And at 6:30 on July 5th, 2018, I was standing in the crater of Mount Rainier. You could smell the sulfur. You could see little steam vents opened up in the snow here, and see the steam kind of exiting. It's still listed as an active volcano. The last stretch was really steep, was really difficult, was the hardest climb I've ever done to date. So we started out from Camp Muir at 12:15 a.m. with 3 guides and 9 clients. It took about 6 hours to get to the summit. And when we got there, 5 of the 9 clients had made it. Along the way, 4 different clients opted to stop and were walked back down by our guides, or well, some of the guides. So that was a nice little success story with a couple little ripples, a bad knee, and bad weather getting in the way. So this is a shot coming down on the descent. This is a formation called Cathedral Rocks, and in the background there you can see Mount Baker. It's just a beautiful spot, and you can't see these kind of things from the parking lot of Paradise. It's just it's too bad in a way that you got to go through all this effort to see this, but it is beautiful, and it's so much different than. There's one part I couldn't find a good picture, but there's one part of the descent where we're looking down on a mountain called Little Tahoma, and it's an 11,000 foot peak with a real sharp point on it, and we're looking down on that, and it's way down, and you realize, wow, we are really up that high. So I got back to Rochester, and I had already signed up for a 15K road race, and I thought, well, when am I ever going to be in a position to climb a mountain like Rainier and 3 days later run a 15K race? So I went and did it. And the first 2 miles were rough, and I was really considering this a bad piece of judgment. But my body warmed up, and I was good. I was still a little bit tired from that hike, but felt good. So some months later, I got to thinking, well, I need another goal. And I kind of tested myself at 14,400 feet and thought, well, maybe I can test myself a little bit higher. I wonder how much higher I can go. So I thought, well, I had heard the guides talking about Aconcagua, but that's an 8,000 foot difference between those 2 mountains, Rainier and Aconcagua, which is a lot. So I called the guides at RMI, and they recommended a trip called the Mexico Volcanoes. And it's less expensive, and it's about intermediate for altitude between Rainier and Aconcagua, and it'd be a good chance to test myself. So it was a 9-day trip based out of Mexico City. And these are the 3 mountains we would climb: La Malinche, Ista, and Orizaba. And we would climb them in that order. So our second day there, we drove to La Malinche Park. We got there a little bit late in the morning, which isn't a good move weather-wise. The park is at 10,000 feet, and we started climbing the mountain, a couple hundred feet taller than Mount Rainier. And we got to about 13,200 feet just out of the cloud, or out of the trees, and a thunderstorm moved in, and we waited about an hour, tried to wait it out, and one thunderstorm after the next rolled in, and that's a pretty common thing in the afternoon this time of year in Mexico. So our guides were like, we're not going up on a mountain where there's lightning nearby. So we turned around and went back to the park where we stayed overnight. There's another picture of La Malinche. You can kind of see the tree line there a little bit. And even at 10,000 feet, you really felt just going up a set of stairs from our little lodge to the restaurant. If you weren't deep breathing, you were out of breath, which is just a weird thing. But then again, we were we were at practically sea level days before this, or at least I was coming from Rochester. So the next day we drove to another hut, and we were going to climb Ista, which is 17,340 feet. And that's Ista in the background there. A little bit of a closer picture. And supposedly it looks like a woman lying down. That's what the legend says anyway. So we hiked in a couple thousand feet to our tent at High Camp here. A 3-man tent with 3 men in it. It was a little bit tight, but as usual, with these kind of missions, you set your tent up, you make some dinner, you're sleeping by 6 o'clock p.m. and they're going to wake you up at midnight or 1. So there's not a lot of time in the tent and there's not a lot of sleep in the tent either. That seems to be the way it works. Those are just some rocks on the way to our high camp there. This picture was just taken late afternoon before we went and had some dinner and went to bed. And here's the summit of Ista. Behind me is, I believe behind me is the crater. It's kind of hard to see. We got up there actually in the dark. We got up there pretty quickly. It still took about 6 hours, but we moved pretty good. So the first half of the climb was on this scree, which is, if you don't know what scree is, it's loose rock, and it can be like gravelly, it can be bigger rocks, but mostly it's this loose rock, like walking on gravel, but sometimes on a foot of it. And so your footing isn't really good, and you lose a step every time you walk. You lose half a step. It's kind of annoying. But we had to ascend that in order to get up to the part where the snow and ice started. And then we put on mountaineering boots, crampons. We were wearing harnesses. We were roped up together for safety. So on the way down, walking back down in the snow and ice was fine. We got to where the scree started. We put on our regular hiking boots, and my feet had started to swell due to the altitude. And all the way down, my toes were bumping against the ends of my shoes, and that was bad because I knew I was going to lose toenails. We went all the way back down to the parking lot. We drove to Puebla, where we stayed in a hotel for the night, and the next day was a rest day. So one of the sites to see there is this historic pyramid that has the church built on top of it, because that's what conquerors did back then. But it was really interesting because there were many places where the original pyramid was still exposed. So that was a nice little historical lesson. We tasted the local beverages, which in Puebla is this mezcal, which was very good. So we stayed one more night in Puebla, and then the next day we drove out to another little town about an hour or two away, where we were going to get ready to do our third mountain. So we stopped at this outfitter who had 4-wheel drive trucks, and we loaded all of our gear there. And he drove us 2 hours on a very bad road that only a truck like this could probably maneuver around. And we landed at the La Piedra hut. And this very basic building, plywood bunks, a countertop that you could put your stoves on and cook. But we were out of the weather, and it was nice. So again, went to bed very early, alpine start. I think we started at 2. I think we woke up at 2 and we were walking up the mountain by 3. First part of the hike was through rocky area. We didn't need crampons or anything. We did have our mountaineering boots on, but no crampons. We weren't roped up. And then we reached the base of the Hamapa Glacier. And this is just a portion of it, but it gives you an idea how steep it was. It's steep and really long. No crevasses or anything like that, but very steep, and you had to be very careful. At one point, about halfway up, I lost a hiking pole, and I watched it slide right down to the very base of the glacier, probably with a bunch of other equipment that people had dropped. It was a really hard climb. Again, way harder than Mount Rainier. Just the altitude was a lot, 18,491 feet. And every breath was a deep breath interspersed by pressure breaths. And we were still moving pretty slow. Here I am on the summit. That's the guide I was roped up with, Ulysses. He's a local guide. And I asked him when we got to the top how many times he had been up here. And this was his 127th summit of Orizaba. And then he showed me behind us, he showed me where his village is. You could see it from the top of this mountain. This mountain is the second most prominent volcano mountain in the world. It's only second to Kilimanjaro. And proof of that, well, there's the crater. Not a crater you walk through. You maybe could rope down in there, but it's a pretty deep, high-walled crater. Really impressive. And again, the smell of sulfur. Here's the shadow that Orizaba casts. So we were there not long after sunrise. And you have to be there to believe how big that shadow really is. It's just awesome. That's the only word I can think of. It's huge. So we descended the mountain, got back. We spent one night in a hostel, which was it was a soap factory back in the early 1900s, converted into a hostel. So we stayed there overnight. The next morning, we were driven to the Mexico City airport where we caught all of our outgoing flights. As I was on the plane, and I was pretty tired, my feet were really sore. I knew I had 6 or 7 toenails that were purple, which meant there was blood blisters under them and I was going to lose them. Just wasn't feeling tremendous. Just a lot of hiking in a short period of time. And as I was flying, my wife was texting me, telling me about the fact that there's openings on the upcoming expedition, Aconcagua. My original plan was to do the Mexico trip, which was exactly a year ago. It was November 2019, and then go to Aconcagua November 2020, a year later. Give me a year to rest and train again. And her point was, well, you're already trained. You just step it up a little bit, and there you go. So I was like, well, I need to process that for a little while longer. So I returned back. And about 6 days after returning, I was out in the woods hunting with my hiking buddy, Jim, the one who got me into all this hiking. And I actually registered for a January 19th trip of 2020 to Aconcagua. So here's a little drawing I made of Aconcagua and gives you an overview of what it is. It's 30 miles from the trailhead to the summit. If you were to walk straight in a straight line all the way up to the summit, it's 30 miles. It's 24 miles from the park entrance just to base camp. So the way it works is it's billed as a 24-day trip. And this is a guided trip by RMI again. So we have 2 days of travel at each end of the trip, 2 days to get down there. And 20 days on the mountain. So the permit, you need a permit to climb this mountain. And for non-residents, it's $1,000. And you got to bring cash, and they like unused $100 bills, actually. Some more numbers. Mendoza, the city we flew into, is at 2,400 feet of altitude. The trailhead for Aconcagua is at 9,000 feet. On the average, about 40% of those that attempt this summit make it. And what usually stops them is altitude sickness and/or weather conditions. An average of 3 people die on the mountain every year. And the summit at 22,841 feet, which is the highest summit outside of the Himalayas, has 40% of the oxygen present at sea level. So a little bit, I'll tell you, all these trips I did where I was pushing my body further than it had gone before, there's a real level of fear that, what's your body going to do? Just no, that's part of the fun and part of the fear, at least for me. This was my gear pile. So I won't go through the whole thing, but we packed up 220-liter duffels with most of our gear. We have a light day pack there, 2 sleeping bags, a -25-degree down sleeping bag, ice axe, mountaineering boots, 5 layers of upper body clothing, 4 layers lower body clothing, helmet, crampons, 3 1-liter bottles, 13 pounds of personal food, eating utensils, high altitude sickness meds, water treatment. I also, puffy coat, you can see there, a blue puffy coat. I also had one of these spot messengers. And what this was good for was when I turned this on, it sent back a GPS location every 10 minutes. And I have a subscription service so that my family could go to a website and they could see my progress on a map, which was handy. The other thing this unit does is it allows me to text and email through the satellite service, which again was pretty handy because there wasn't cell phone service where I was going. Just wasn't available. And this unit worked really well. I carried a portable solar panel and a battery pack, which was that also worked out very nicely. We had a lot of good weather on the mountain. It was very sunny and you're very close to the sun. So I think this thing was working pretty efficiently. And the solar panel folds up into a pretty small package. On January 18th, I turned 62 years old. And yes, I ripped off this bacon and eggs breakfast from an episode of Breaking Bad. On January 19th, the day after, I was sitting in the Rochester airport wondering about my decision to attempt Aconcagua. It's the kind of funny, sick feeling you get like right before a road race or anything else where I was wondering if I was biting off a little too much. So the way the flights worked, I flew from New York to JFK, from Rochester, New York to JFK, had a layover, flew overnight to Santiago, Chile. From Santiago, I had a 90-minute layover and then the flight to Mendoza. Total travel time about 20 hours. Here we are in the Mendoza airport. Our guide service was right there with a shuttle to pick us up, which was handy. So a little bit about the logistics of this trip. So I paid for guide services through Rainier Mountaineering. This is my 4th trip with them. I worked with them before. I trusted them, and they're just a good company. Their guides are really well trained. They in turn subcontract with Grajales Expeditions, which is located in Argentina, and they own infrastructure on the mountain. And we'll see some of that. But Grajales arranges the in-country hotels, ground transportation. Like I said, the infrastructure while in the park, and RMI supplies guides, and they have their own equipment, tents and kitchen essentials and food and those sorts of things. And then the other thing Grajales does is they handle our applications and payments for our park permits. So we don't have to go to the park service and wait in lines and those things. They just took care of it. That's our hotel in Mendoza, a really clean, inexpensive place to stay, professional staff. It was a really excellent hotel. So now we're at the Grajales warehouse. We left the hotel and we drive to Penitentes, about 115 miles away where the trailhead is. So Grajales has a warehouse. So we're packing up our duffels and our packs. One duffel is going to contain stuff we don't need until base camp. The other duffel is going to contain stuff that we might need on the way to base camp, because base camp is going to take us 2.5 days to get to. It's 2 overnights. So that's what we're doing here. And that's some of our, well, those are the other 4 guys on our crew and one of our guides. Here's our hotel at Penitentes. Lots of great rocks. There's the view across the street. Just a pretty awesome view in my estimation. There's the trailhead with the park ranger office. And that's where we started out. We're headed down the Bacchus Valley. So right behind that green container is our trail. So we're at about 9,000 feet here at the trailhead. About 7 or 8 miles down the trail, we stop at Pampa de Leñas, where we have our first overnight. And you can see there's a yellow and white Grahalis dome tent and a little picnic bench with a cover over it. And you can't see the outhouses, but there's some outhouses in back. And that's where we had our first overnight. So what's it like here? You're in high desert. It's 90 degrees. It's sunny. It was sunny all the time. And I never thought I'd wear a light hoodie with long sleeves on a 90+ degree day, but you just had to because the sun was just that intense. This is a little bit of what the valley looks like along the way. Okay, mules. So mules are used to get our gear from the trailhead to base camp, that 24 miles. So our duffel bags are tied up to the mules, and the mules travel with us. They stop at the camps that we stop at, and they carry our stuff all the way to base camp. And a fun fact, I was talking to one of the guys, the muleteers, and they put a female mule like at the head. They let a female mule go down the trail first, and then these other guys just kind of follow. Most of them, there's a few rogues. Every time, once in a while, a mule goes rogue, and a muleteer has to go retrieve them. That's our tent. 3-man tent, 2 men to a tent, well, 2 people. We didn't have any ladies on our trip, but so that's what those look like. We got really good at setting those up because we did it so many times. Another view of the valley. Rocks, you're going to see lots of pictures of rocks. I'm not a geologist, but anything that looks like a rock that's different than it's from here, I take a picture of it. Just crazy formations and colors. There's a little panoramic of the valley. There's our first view of Aconcagua. So we've been on the trail now for 2 days, or almost 2 days, and we've been going pretty much north. And now we're going to start to make a left-hand turn and head west. And so now we can see Aconcagua. And we all just stand there and stare at it. And I think everybody's a little bit afraid, wondering what the heck. It's too late to back out now. There's Aconcagua in the clouds. You can see the river a little bit going through the valley. Water treatment. We use this stuff the guide service recommended called Aquamira. Never used it before. You mix 5 drops of each part in a little cap they give you, and then you add it to a liter of water. It didn't affect the taste of the water, didn't affect the smell, and we all stayed pretty healthy. So I would have to say it probably worked. Another little panorama of the valley. And here we are, here's base camp. So not in its entirety. We'll see other pictures, but you can see in the back there, those yellow and white tents are the tents owned by Grahalis. And then there's the 3 buildings. One of them is a storage building. That middle building, I believe, is the doctor's office. And then to the right of that is the ranger station. So now we're at 13,800 feet. And if you just stand around and shallow breathe and then try to walk 200 feet up to an outhouse, you're out of breath. You just learn you have to deep breathe all the time if you don't want to feel like you're out of breath. Here's one of the outhouses at base camp. Really nice, really clean. Always stocked with paper, air freshener, hand sanitizer. The system here works a lot like it does at JBL, at Johns Brook Lodge. There's a barrel underneath the toilet. When it becomes full, they cap it off. It gets brought over to the helipad and put on a pallet. And when they get enough of them, and a helicopter has capacity, they haul them out. So that's all part of how they keep the mountain clean. Another close up in case you are wondering what they look like closer up. They were really nice. They were cleaned like 3 times a day. There's a little better picture of base camp. I love that that rock formation in the background. I've got more pictures of that just because it was so cool. So our Grahalis tents were up there, those dome tents, and we slept down here. I think that's not our orange tent. Our orange tent might be on the right there in the lower right-hand corner. We had our own dining tent. This was our dining tent, and that's our crew. 2 guides and 6 clients. We had really good food. Everything was clean. We had these nice chairs to sit in, not rocks. Really great. Oh, and we had internet access at base camp. I think it was $20 for 2 hours, but we had it. I actually made a phone call back to my hiking buddy, Jim, who got me into all this. He was at his camp up in the Adirondacks and he called me, which was crazy. The day we arrived at base camp, we saw a medical rescue. There was a person with acute mountain sickness and they were airlifted out and taken to Mendoza for medical attention. Our guide service requires that you carry traveler's insurance, which includes emergency evacuation, just for these kind of reasons. There's another picture of the helicopter. So we got a rest day we slept overnight. We got a rest day at base camp and we took a little hike. Partway up the way to Camp 1. And as you saw from that map, or maybe you didn't see, there's base camp, and then there's Camp 1, Camp 2, and Camp 3, all above base camp. And you'll see how we move to those camps. Another shot of Aconcagua sticking out there. So I read a post on the internet that said they were thinking about shooting another Martian movie, and that Aconcagua was on the list of places they might go to shoot it. And looking at these kind of rocks and the color and everything, I don't know if the sky in Mars is really blue. I don't imagine not, but you could imagine somebody shooting a film here and saying, yeah, we were on Mars. It looks like we were on Mars. Here's a typical dinner we had at base camp. Pretty much everything was made from scratch, and they had really great cooks there, and the food didn't stop. If you were hungry, they'd bring out another plate of food for you. All right, so how do we get from one camp to the other? Basically, well, let me go to the next slide. Yeah. So basically, how do you get from one camp to the other? So we're at base camp. So what we do is we'd have a carry day. So we take all of our extra gear, everything we need for the rest of the trip up to the summit. We would pack that up in our backpacks and we'd carry it to the next camp. Then we come right back down. So the idea was you climb high, you sleep low. And it's all part of the acclimation process so that you get used to the thin air. Then we'd have a rest day, maybe just do a short hike. Then we have another overnight, and then we do what we call a move day. We take all the remaining gear we need for the rest of the trip up to the summit and bring it to the next camp. In this case, it would be Camp 1. And our packs were heavy because going to Camp 1, you got all this extra stuff that you need: fuel, food, tents, all that stuff. So it was 2 days of, for me anyway, carrying a 60-pound pack, which is heavy at altitude. Another picture of those rocks that I like. Here's the view from Camp 1, looking up towards where we're going to go to Camp 2. That's not Camp 2, but it's out of the picture, but that's the path we take. There's one of our clients who was an interesting guy. He's a bridge inspector out of Colorado, originally from Canada, and he inspects bridges in the outback of Canada and America. Just goes to crazy places to inspect bridges. Another kind of cool view. Okay, human waste on the mountain. So when you get above base camp, you're assigned 2 poop bags, and you see this one has a number on it, and they're assigned by the park, by the rangers, and those bags you use for solid human waste. And you need to come back down to base camp with them, because if you don't have them, you're going to get fined. That's just what they do, because they don't want, there's in the old days, you just went on the mountain, except that with it being so dry, nothing decomposes very quickly, and the place gets pretty bad. So this is an effort to keep the mountain clean. So here's an example of a poop tent at Camp 1. So they'd set up a tent, you'd take your bag, go in the tent, set your bag up, do what you had to do. There was paper and hand sanitizer in there. And then you would take your bag, seal it up, bring it back to your tent, and then outside your tent, just cover it with rocks so it doesn't blow away. And, it's a little weird, but the mountain stays clean. Here's our fine dining at Camp 1, altitude 16,200 feet. Oh, by the way, we'd already had one person drop out when we did our move to Camp 1. One guy decided that he didn't want to go any further, and he happened to be my tent mate. So the rule is they can't leave a client alone in a tent. So two of the other guys, luckily or unluckily, had me as a roommate. So we took a 3-man tent, which was going to be comfortable for 2 men, and put me in it. So it was 3 of us. It was cozy. So the move to Camp 2 was very similar. We carried all of our extra gear to Camp 2. So we climbed high, we cached it, we came back down to Camp 1 for the night. We had a rest day at Camp 1 and another overnight. And the next day we took all the gear we didn't need. We didn't need to bring our poop bags up there because we already had one for Camp 2. And we moved all of our stuff up to Camp 2 and stayed at Camp 2. And here's some pictures on the way to Camp 2. So the interesting part about Camp 2 is when you get there, you start thinking about Camp 3. And when you start thinking about Camp 3, you start thinking about the weather. Because at 19,600 feet, it's a bad place to be in bad weather. Like the winds can shred your tent and you could be stuck there because of a prolonged snowstorm. So a lot of thought goes into weather planning. And it looked like there was some bad weather on the horizon. Weather horizon, not on the visual horizon. So here's our Camp 2 setup. You can see that orange or yellow and white tent is the Grahalis tent. And to the left of that are our client tents. Camp 2 also had internet, something new for these guys. They had solar panels, a satellite dish, and some FM radio for emergency communications inside this tent, a dome tent, where we could kind of assemble and just hang out. So we started looking at our move to Camp, or our carry to Camp 3, and looked at the weather. And we had 3 to 4 days of bad weather coming. So we had to shorten our schedule by 1 day. And we decided we would do our move to Camp 3, set up our tents, have dinner, and then the next day, early morning, we'd make our summit attempt. That was the only window we had that was safe. Just more pictures of Camp 2, I think. Yeah, these are all Camp 2 pictures. All right, now we're at Camp 3. The rocks are really weird here. I took a lot of pictures of these things. So Camp 3, that was an effort to get to 19,600 feet, the highest I'd ever been by 1,000 feet. Just hard. Even though we weren't carrying 60-pound backpacks, we were still carrying a lot of stuff. Even like boiling water, like when the guides went to make us dinner to boil water, they had to have 3 stoves under the pot of water to make it boil. So the plan was we get to bed early, the wake up call would come at 3 a.m. We'd have our feet moving up the mountain at 4 a.m. More cool rocks. I hate to speed by these, but just where do you see rocks like this? Another shot of the lower part of Camp 3 from our position. More Camp 3. The Andes off in the distance. There's our little nook. We were in a nice little sheltered spot in the upper part of Camp 3, our 3 tents. Guides are making supper. All right. So we woke up at 3 o'clock and got ready to move up the mountain. It was cold, dark, a little bit of a breeze. We had pretty much every stitch of clothing we owned, we brought with us. That was our orders. Don't leave any clothing behind. We knew it was going to be cold because we're kind of hiking in the shadow of the mountain for a part of the ascent. So the plan, what we were figuring on was 8 hours to reach the summit, to go 3,200 feet, and another 4 to 5 to descend back to Camp 3. And the idea was we'd take 5 breaks on the way up, and it was just hard to breathe. And I don't know, pressure breathing is when you take a deep breath, you purse your lips and you blow out the breath really hard. And you needed to do a lot of that, and every breath had to be a deep breath, even though we weren't moving that fast, but you just needed to do that because the air was that thin. All right, this. So we, between Camp 3, and the summit. We had 3 more people turn around and decide to go back. And, you know, that's a tough decision because it took us a long time to get here, and everybody trained really hard. Everybody had a resume that included some really tall mountains, triathlons. It wasn't like, you know, somebody, you know, we had people here from that didn't belong here, that just paid their way and really didn't belong on a mountain this big. They were all, you know, steady people. But at one point or another, they made the decision to stop and turn around. And I think that's just a hard thing to do. So I just wanted to kind of talk about that a little bit. So we got to within 1,000 feet of the summit, and we had a break. And there was just the 2 of us, 2 clients and our senior guide, because the other guide had walked the 3 other climbers back down to Camp 3. So the deal was, you know, he asked us if he thought we could make it, and we both said yes. And I know what was going through my mind was, I'd come a really long way to be here. I didn't really want to come back. I didn't want to live with the regret of turning around. I didn't have high altitude sickness. My legs still felt okay. I was just fighting to get oxygen. That was, and it was uncomfortable. I mean, it just was. It was painful. But it all flashed through my head in a few seconds, and I just knew I was going to be on top of this mountain unless a guide stopped me and said, "Hey, listen, you're just in no shape to do this. We got to stop." But the problem was, if either one of us stopped, it would have messed up the summit for the other guy, because the guide couldn't leave one of us alone. He couldn't go to the summit with the other guy, and he couldn't let a guy go to the summit alone and leave somebody on the mountain. They just can't do that. It's not safe. So we trudged up that mountain. And I don't remember a lot about the last 1,000 feet, to be honest with you. It was head down. I was breathing, like taking 2 steps, doing a pressure breath and a deep breath, another 2 steps. And I just kept doing that. I found a rhythm and I just kept doing it. But the good news is I made it to the summit. It was around noontime that we got there. We were the only ones up there, strangely enough. And it was just an amazing place to be. Just, I do remember the summit, just not that last 1,000. But the other kind of cool thing was, because there really wasn't any climbing in the Himalayas this time of year, that the 3 of us were probably the highest humans on the planet that day, for that little brief piece of time. That was kind of interesting, an interesting thought anyway. And so I did take some really nice pictures up there. I mean, these pictures don't do any justice to what I was seeing. It was just the most awesome, different thing I've ever seen. Just, you know, you just look at these pictures and it didn't even look real. There's the south face of Aconcagua from the summit. That's one of my favorite pictures. Just love that picture. So after 30 minutes on the summit, it was time to descend. The descent was difficult as well. There's a lot of loose rock and scree as usual. And I was just tired. I was exhausted. And, you know, there was a lot of work put into just getting up to the summit. And, you know, everybody will tell you, getting up the mountain is just part of it. You have to get down, and you have to get down safely. And it took 5 hours, but I literally stumbled back into Camp 3, and one of my tent mates, actually both of my tent mates had turned around on the hike above Camp 3. One of them saw me coming down. He helped me back, you know, to find our tents, because I was just wasted, and got my backpack off, fed me some water. I had a few snacks, and I've never been so tired in all my life. I mean, it was a combination of being tired, being through this amazing experience, and just looking around and going, I'm at 19,600 feet, and look what I can see. It was just crazy. So we had a dinner of a freeze-dried kind of dinner. They just cooked up some hot water, and we had some dehydrated meals we ate. I didn't eat much because altitude kind of does that. It really kills your appetite. So we got in our cozy little tent, the 3 of us. And one of my tent mates looks over to me and he goes, "Hey," he goes, you you look like death when you came into Camp 3. And I go, yeah, I felt like death. Anyway, whoops, I skipped ahead there. Sorry, got excited. My mouse finger got excited. So the next morning, we expected to wake up leisurely, have a breakfast, and then the plan was you hike all the way back down to base camp, picking up your stuff as you go down. Well, Mother Nature had another treat in store for us. The high winds came. We didn't get snow yet, but the high winds came and started blowing our tent in the middle of the night. So at 6:30, the guides woke us up. I think they didn't need to wake us up. I think everybody was awake and said, we got to pack our stuff up right now and get the heck out of here before it gets worse. So without coffee, breakfast, or anything, we packed up everything, got it in our backpacks, and we were headed down to Camp 2. So we stopped there for a short break, picked up our garbage, our poo bags, anything we left there, fuel, anything we didn't need, at Camp 3. And we headed down to Camp 1, where we did the same thing. Got all of our stuff and continued down. So we were back down in base camp, I think around 3:30 or so in the afternoon. Of course, we got a big greeting when we got down there. They always like to see clients come off the mountain safely. So that was kind of nice. We had some snacks in our dining tent. We sat in chairs, which was really nice. This was nice. And so it was just time to process all this stuff. So we got an overnight at base camp. We had a really great dinner there. I could have taken a shower. I think I was up to 15 days, 14 or 15 days without a shower. We used baby wipes a lot, but all my clothing was dirty, dusty. And so I skipped the shower. They did have Coca-Cola for sale for $7 a bottle. And I think a beer was $10, but I thought I would wait till I got back to Mendoza. And then there was the walk out. And this is one of the last pictures I took of Aconcagua, one of my favorites. Just really bright blue sky, just a beautiful place. So it took us 2.5 days to go from base camp to the trailhead. It took 2 days to get us to the trailhead. We walked 17 miles the first day out. And again, we were all kind of beat, and that was just a long 17 miles. But gladly, our mules took our duffels back. When we got to Pampa de Lenas, where we had our first overnight, the muleteers cooked us a traditional Argentine grill of beef, chicken, pork, and blood sausage, and they just kept bringing it. We had Argentine flan for dessert. And then the next day we got up, had breakfast, walked the last 7 miles out to the trailhead, got our permits stamped at the ranger station, and headed for our hotel in Mendoza. And that night, well, first of all, we all showered, which is amazing. The dirt that came off of the dirt that came off of me was amazing. But I think everybody was just as dirty. We went to a great restaurant right across the street from our hotel, and I had one of the best T-bone steaks I've ever had in my life. The Argentinians are very proud of their beef and their red wine, and we enjoyed both while we were there. We had extra days because we didn't use any of our weather days, and we shaved a day off the schedule. So it ended up we had an extra 3 days in Mendoza to walk around and see things. On our last day, this is on my flight from Mendoza to Santiago. A picture out the plane window of Aconcagua. That's the last I saw that mountain. And here's some references if you want to check out. Like if you go to any of the guide sites, will give you an itinerary for any of these trips I was on, day by day, what happens, where you go, how the whole thing runs. There's a couple good books I referred to here that I have. And then I got my email address here. If you have specific questions or comments and you want to email me, any kind of feedback you have about this, I'd be grateful for you to give me. If you don't want to do it to me in person, I think Jill or Dave, you could throw your comments at them and I could anonymously get them that way. And then one last thing. I found this quote that I thought was pretty awesome. And I think it's true. And I'd like to think that each one of us has something extraordinary yet to accomplish in our lives. And thanks for your attention.
Gary, thank you. That was very interesting. That was great. I see people want to clap. And this week we decided that we would open up for discussion. The official meeting is finished, but we, Gary will finish sharing his screen, and then the little thumbnail photos can come up of people, and you're welcome to ask Gary questions and hang around and chat for another 10 minutes. We thought that this would just give folks a chance to give a little feedback to Gary. And if you've got questions, you can ask him questions. So if you if your time is spent and you need to leave the meeting, that's understandable. Feel free to do that. But you're also welcome to talk to Gary. You can line up in the chat and Dave can, start you. But really, thank you, Gary, for a wonderful presentation. That was really fascinating to learn about Aconcagua.
Well, thank you, Jill. It was a lot of information in a short period of time. Stop.
Well, I think we got the gist of what you had to do to climb that mountain. That was awesome. Anybody have a question for Gary?
What is he going to do next?
I knew this question would come up. Well, I just want you to know my wife is in the room, so I have to be a little careful about what I say. I mean, I've thought about the Appalachian Trail. I've thought about the Wonderland Trail, which goes around Rainier National Park. We have some great trails in our Adirondacks. The Cranberry 50 would be fun. I've thought about Denali. It's a little complicated because I have to go on a trip to learn the skills I need to be on Denali. So that becomes a bit of a pretty expensive endeavor. But that's, I guess, a possibility. Then there's the Northeast 111. I mean, I've only gotten about 60 of those done. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm not going to stop, that's for sure. Not until the doctors tell me, hey, listen, you're getting too old for this.
Cool.
What was your camera? What were you using to take the pictures?
Oh, it was just a Samsung phone. It was, it was nothing fancy. Just my, just most of the pictures. I guess all the pictures were taken with this phone. Yeah.
Well, you did a nice job with it all.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, I have to look at those pictures every few days because, it still hasn't hit me that I was standing on top of this mountain. I mean, it sounds stupid, but it really, it's been months and it's still, part of me is like, okay, I was up there. And I'm like, so what? What next? I can't, I mean, I will say this, I can't do anything with the word Everest in it. Even Everest Base Camp, like there's a trek to Everest Base Camp, because it's got the word Everest in it. My wife gets really nervous. And so it's been super supportive up till now. And I don't want to, 40 years, I don't want to mess it up now.
Yeah, no, I think at any point in life, and particular at some more senior years as you and I are, it's a very satisfying experience. And yeah, you can give yourself a big pat on the back at any age, but particularly after 6 decades.
Well, the bit of advice I would have for people is don't wait till you're 62 to do this stuff. But if you're 62 or older, I can't speak for older because I'm not there yet. Don't give up. You're not too old to do this stuff. I mean, well, you guys know you're all out hiking and everything. I see the pictures. So, I mean, part of it is just like a challenge just to prove, an old guy can still, haul his butt up a mountain, I guess. I mean, it's that I guess it's where determination bleeds into stubbornness. Like I consider myself very determined. My wife tells me I can be very stubborn at times, but that's like a fine line, right? I mean, if you're not stubborn, you're not going to stick to something, good or bad.
Gary, I have a question. First of all, congratulations on battling the red slime of Allen on your first 46 hike. But second of all, the Adirondack 46s were, that was really your first introduction to climbing.
Yes.
And I've heard a lot of people say that the Adirondacks taught them a lot about high altitude climbing, even though it's not totally high altitude, simply because most of the Adirondacks, we don't use switchbacks, as you well know. What can you say in terms of what the Adirondacks taught you that you kept with you as you continued to climb in various locations?
Well, I guess some of it was just perseverance. I mean, my buddy Jim and I, when we went on hike, we have some of what we call epic hikes, where we started out in the morning and finished like the next day. You know, we did the whole Dix Range in one day. You know, we could barely walk and roll our sleeping bags out in the lean-to, the Slide Brook lean-to. When we finished, we hiked 4 mountains the night before Hurricane Irene came in. And we were going to go to sleep in the AMR parking lot on 73 there. We finished at like midnight or some crazy thing. And it's a good thing we didn't, because the road washed out. You know, it started raining. We headed back to my buddy's camp at an inlet. But like winter mountaineering school, you know, I was used to using crampons because of the Adirondack. We hiked to get the peaks done in 26 months. We hiked a lot of winter peaks. So we got crampons, you know, micro spikes, snowshoes. I learned better how to dress for the weather. And then Adirondack Winter Mountaineering School was fantastic. They teach a lot of those skills. We go over to the ski slope, the Olympic ski slope, and do self-arrest with an ice axe, which is a mountaineering skill you need to have. Fortunately, on one of our trips, we went up Giant. Giant was a sheet of ice from 73 almost all the way to the top, because I never carried an ice axe. And our instructor's like, oh yeah, you got to have an ice axe. And I'm like, okay, I'll carry this crazy thing. And we needed it for 95% of that trip. So yeah, I think a lot of it was, you know, just persevering, because, you know, sometimes it's a death march coming off a mountain. I mean, you know, you laugh about it later and you're all happy and all that stuff, but it's, you know, it gets quiet. People get grumpy, and it's you know, sometimes it's a death march. So you get that first beer.
What's your favorite hike?
My favorite hike. Well, like in the Adirondacks.
Sure, we'll start there.
Do I know you, lady? Do I know you?
Yeah.
I think I like Gothics. I've been up there, I think twice in the winter and 2 or 3 times now in the summer. And I really like the views from that mountain. I like, what's the other one I like? Algonquin. I did a bunch of training hikes with heavy backpacks on Algonquin. That's a fun one. And then the Rocky Peak Ridge to Giant. I did a heavy backpack trip on that one time. My wife dropped me off at New Russia, and I walked, you know, the ridge and then Giant, and then down Giant to 73 where she picked me up. But those are all good, but there's other ones too. I mean, I climbed Cascade and Porter with my wife and my daughter. I climbed a couple peaks with my son-in-law, Ryan, you know, that aren't the biggest ones around, but they had nice views, you know, so it was kind of an encouraging thing for a new person to go up to, and when they're treated to a nice view, I think it's a better experience.
Makes sense.
I got to get you out.
Gary,
You need to go to a mountain.
Hey, Gary, did you encounter any animals on in Aconcagua?
I did. We saw some variation of a fox. I can't remember what they called it, but it almost looked like a coyote, but it was a fox. And then there were guanacos, which they're like alpacas, I think, very similar to an alpaca. They have long legs, and they don't look a lot like a deer. And we saw them in the valley. There weren't any above base camp that we saw. And they weren't afraid of us. They'd be, you know, 80 yards away eating some food, and we'd walk by and they just didn't care, couldn't have cared less. And then I think the other thing we saw was a condor or two, I believe. Really big bird.
Gary, I just want to say, real nice presentation. And I was just curious on Aconcagua, and I'm not pronouncing it correctly. It's a tough one, but it didn't look like you were on a glacier for much of the hike. Was it mostly a lot of scree? Is it a glaciated peak at all, or what? And you know, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No. Go finish your question.
And you know, if what you know, being at that elevation, I'm kind of surprised that there wasn't more ice and snow at the higher elevations than what I saw in the pictures, at least. And maybe there was, but it just didn't seem that way from the pictures.
Yeah, I think it's partly because we were hiking towards the end of summer that a lot of the snow had melted, and there were no glaciers. Well, we traversed the Polish glacier, but we only traversed it. It wasn't like we went very much up, up onto the glacier. We just did a traverse. That's just the route we took. And like a lot of big mountains, well, like a lot of mountains, there's several routes up the mountain. There's the normal route, which I didn't talk about at all, that goes up the other side of the mountain that a lot of people take. It's either they take the normal route or they take the Bacchus Valley route. And then there's glaciated routes. And there was a group staying in the Grajales area while we were there. And they were either from Germany or Russia. And they were training for an Everest expedition. And so what we heard was that these guys had been sleeping in hyperbaric tents to get used to altitude while they were back home at wherever they live. And then they came to Aconcagua and they were going to do one of the very, very steep glaciers just as practice for Everest. And they would do it on an expanded schedule or a shortened schedule because they were already acclimated because of the use of the hyperbaric tents. So there's a lot of ways to get to the top of Aconcagua. There's two ways that are the least difficult. And then there's the other ways, most of which are all technical, where you're roped up, ice climbing, it's really, you got to know what you're doing. I mean, but anyway, if that answers your question.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Yeah, a lot of people say, well, Aconcagua is just a long walk. And it is. There's nothing technical about it. I mean, we were never roped up. We were never wearing harnesses. It's a long walk. And as you saw, there's parts of the mountain you climb twice because you have to make 2 trips to get to the next camp. So that and the altitude and the weather are what make it, difficult. Now, I've never climbed Denali. The guides that we were with had both been on Denali multiple times. And their claim was summit day on Aconcagua is harder than summit day on Denali. But Denali's very different. You're on glaciers, you're hauling a sled behind you with your gear, you got a heavy backpack on. So it's a little bit apples and oranges, I think, having never been to Denali.
And like you say, with the high elevation, everybody reacts differently. And, you can be up, let's say, at 15,000 feet 9 times in a row and not have any difficulty. And then that 10th time, all of a sudden you come down with altitude sickness.
Yeah, even the guides have said that's happened to them. And that's the scary part, especially if you're just a client that's going on a climb. You don't know when it's going to hit you. You just, because they say it kind of creeps up on you. And the next thing you know, somebody's saying, "Are you okay? What's your name?" You're just mumbling. So it is kind of scary. I mean, I guess I didn't go over the part where the doctor checked us out at base camp. We actually had to have an appointment with the doctor, and he, checked our lungs, checked our blood pressure, our oxygen saturation, and found out what medicines we were on. And he had to sign our permit off to say we were okay to ascend. And so when we got to base camp, it was pretty common. Everybody was, in mid to low 80% oxygen saturation, which, if you walked into a hospital with that, they wouldn't let you out. But, the reason for it was we were at altitude and our bodies were getting used to it. And I don't think we ever got really used to it. I mean, because you're always pushing to another altitude and working really hard to breathe. And, it just, I mean, the porters, I didn't talk about them. There were porters you could hire. Those guys would carry an 80-pound backpack and they would pass us on the trail. I mean, they're just but they're there for 3 or 4 months and they're in tremendous shape.
Well, I wonder if anybody has a last question. I think that we need to allow people to go on to the rest of their nights, but it's been a great talk and a great adventure to listen to. It's been very exciting.
Well, thanks so much for the opportunity to tell this story. I really appreciate it, Jill.
Well, you're welcome. It's our pleasure to have you. So thank you very much, Gary.
You're welcome.
Well, I think we'll call it a night. And I think you've probably had a chance to get Gary's contact information, but I have it also if you think of something further that you'd like to discuss with him. So feel free to contact me. And thank you all for joining us tonight. It was great to have you. Thanks, Gary.
Thanks,
It was
Gary.
Yeah, thanks all. Appreciate it.
One other note is that this presentation of Gary's has been recorded. It'll be put up on the ADK GVC website within a week and a half or so when one of our IT guys gets back. And his contact and Gary's contact information, as well as the full presentation, will be available there for you.
Okay, thank you. Good night,
Thanks, Gary.
everyone.
Thanks,
Good night,
everyone.
all.
Gary.
Good night.
Good night.